Hola, cage fighting connoisseurs. This is KidNativeBloodyElbow.com, joined by Connor Rubish, here to walk through the longest day of Ultimate Fighting I've ever wished to experience. It's a long, brutal day. Connor, did you make it? Did you survive?
At the beginning of the day, it was my first day off in quite a long time, and I thought this is going to be good. A day full of fights sounds really good. It wasn't. I didn't like it.
Yeah, it was brutal. The first one was sort of like half a UFC, like half a fight night's worth of quality fights, and then the second one was like just an endless wave of crap.
I don't even think it was the quality of the fights. I think the first card had solid fights. The Brazil card had some fun fights too, but I think having a decent fight night card with the Berlin card, having that followed by a card with unknown fighters that was tied to a TV schedule and therefore had the UFC's typical horrible pacing was not a good idea for the hardcore fans' viewing
Yeah,
experience.
it was brutal. It was brutal. They clearly do not care if the hardcore fans make the journey. These shows, they're telling us, are aimed at the regional audiences, so that means the European audience for the Berlin show and the Brazilian audience for the Ultimate Fighter show. But first, let's run through the cards. Let's start with the UFC Fight Night Berlin. Um, on the undercard, the only fights that really jazzed me, a couple of fights. Maximo Blanco, that guy, he comes out exciting and then barely beats Andy Ogle. Another nail biter for those of us long suffering. Why are we bothering fans of Maximo Blanco? Yuri Alcantara looked impressive, smoking Von Lee in 25 seconds. Magnus Siedenblad looked good, getting a second round guillotine choke, one of those last second of the round guillotine choke. And then judoka Nick Hein. I mean, he's clearly got some limitations, but I was impressed with his overall game. Did you have any other thoughts on the undercard on that one?
Nick Hein impressed me. I liked Nick Hines' performance. I mean, I actually kind of felt that Drew Dober was going to come on hard at the end of that fight, but I think that we saw the natural advantages that a judoka has in mixed martial arts, and that he's got good, strong posture, incredible strength. I mean, you could just see the muscles in his back rippling when they were on the ground. That's the kind of core strength that only judoka and lifelong wrestlers have. And heavy hands. I mean, he looked raw. Let's say that he looked less tactical than Drew Dober, but he had more physical and natural advantages than Drew Dober by far. So I'm looking forward to seeing him develop.
Definitely, definitely. And then this brings us to the main card. Featherweights, Nicholas Backstrom, big upset over the Finn, Tom Ninimaki, and with a weird choke, a bulldog choke. I haven't seen that since, I believe, UFC 32 or 33 when Carlos Newton choked out Pat Miletich to take the lightweight title that way. Pretty good scrap, and I was impressed by Beckstrom's, his obscenity-filled tirade after the fight. The guy seems to have attitude. I like the kid.
Yeah, and his crazy eyes.
Yes. and wacky beard. A good fight. And then Sean Strickland and Luke Barnett, middleweights, a split decision win by Strickland. Very frustrating fight. I mean, if Barnett had a right high kick, he was cutting off the ring fairly well, but he kept letting Strickland get out. And it's just like he would have been walking into a right high kick, but Barnett seemed to have no idea that was possible.
If Barnett just had a consistent approach to striking, he would have won this fight. He had all that success in round two because the thing with Strickland is that he looked very sharp with his defense early, but all that defense was built on parrying and catching punches with his hands. And so when you need your hands to protect against punches, you get punished when your hands are not in position to protect against punches. Therefore, Barnett saw that he started attacking the body with the right hand. That drew Strickland's hand out of position, and then he started landing that right hand over the top. And then I guess he got frustrated going into the third round because Strickland wasn't engaging and did nothing but just wang right hands at his head over and over. And, of course, Strickland was able to defend those. And, if Barnett had done the same exact thing he did in round two, he would have won the fight easily, except for apparently on the one judge who had the fight 30-27 Strickland for some reason.
That was a head scratcher. I was completely baffled by that, and that was clearly deciding. It was a split decision. But it is what it is. Barnett didn't impress me though. He wasn't
No.
hitting with any power, and he was completely baffled by Strickland. I was also not impressed by Strickland, but I was impressed by CB Dalloway middleweight beat Francis Carmont with unanimous decision. Wasn't a scintillating performance, but it was nice to see Dalloway get the win. Nice to see Carmont. I've made no bones about it. I'm not a fan of Francis Carmont. If he would get aggressive, like he showed flashes of today against Dalloway, I could get behind him. He's definitely skilled and dangerous, but he just wants to coast and stall. And I'm glad Dalloway got past him. Any thoughts on that one?
I expected Dalloway's boxing to look better because of his last two fights, but I think I realized that his boxing looks best when he's able to counterpunch, and when he has to come towards you or when he has to cover the distance himself, he doesn't look so hot. He doesn't really have a jab. He doesn't have good level changes and feints. He just kind of lunges in with left hooks.
Yeah, and he was leaning in a really funny
Yeah,
way that you'd think that somebody that's putatively a polished kickboxer like Carmont could capitalize on. But you're right
yeah.
about Carmont not being aggressive at all. Dalloway had to do all the offense on that one, but he got the win, got past him. That's two straight losses for Carmont. Got to knock him out of contention. So hopefully he'll re-examine his game and maybe come out aggressive. But that brings us to the headliner, middleweight Gegard Mousasi and Mark Munoz. Uh, Big win for Mousasi. You got to ask if the 36-year-old Munoz is gone. No, he got knocked out by Lyoto Machida not that long ago, and then now he's been choked out in the first round by Gegard Mousasi, and he just didn't look like he had anything to offer. And he's lost 3 out of his last 4. So, what do you think? Is Mark Munoz done? Is Gegard Mousasi the next big thing?
I doubt a guy like Mark Munoz will agree to be done. I think that it would be still fun to have Mark Munoz in fights if they stop matching him up like he is a top middleweight, because it's pretty clear by this point that he's not. And this is his third devastating main event loss in a row. You know what I mean? Or was it in a row? No,
He had the
okay.
Tim Boetsch win, and after he lost to
And
White.
Tim Boetsch is the quality of fighter that Munoz can fight competitively, and if he loses, it's not going to be devastating like this. And if he wins, it's going to be impressive and fun. That's like fringe top 10, top 15 guys. But it's pretty clear by this point that if you put him against anybody who's ranked around 8 or up, he's going to get absolutely destroyed. Because I guess they couldn't see the Weidman one coming, really. Weidman wasn't that highly touted at that time. So they get an excuse on that one. But Mousasi and Machida are both tailor-made to crush somebody like Munoz, who's not translated his MMA wrestling, or his wrestling to MMA very well, and who is incredibly susceptible to sharp strikers, of which Mousasi definitely is one. Mousasi looked great, though. I mean, takedown defense looked solid. Grappling looked as good as ever. I think people forgot what a good submission grappler he was because he's been so highly touted for his striking lately. But the man can put almost anybody away on the ground. And
Yeah,
yeah,
he's very good. He's much better when he's not limited to playing guard, as he has been in some fights. But
yeah.
but so overall, the Berlin card was fine. I was perfectly happy with that, and felt like I was ready for more fights. But then we get to Sao Paulo, and oh my God. But actually, it started out on a high note because bantamweight Pedro Munoz just beat the bejesus out of Matt Hobar.
Munoz looked how he should look against someone who isn't Rafael Assunção. He looked like a really top prospect. He looked great.
Yeah, he looked really good. I really can't say anything about Matt Harbar. I mean, too early to tell. Like the UFC debut, thrown in at the deep end. Nothing else really caught me on the Fight Pass portion of the card. Do you have any thoughts on those other 2 fights?
It was just those 2 fights. I watched the whole prelims on Fight Pass actually before
Oh
the
yeah,
show.
even the next 4 because I switched over to Fox Sports 1. I thought the opener of the second round of the prelims, Kevin Souza against Mark Edeva, that was a hell. That was a Donnybrook. That was a Pier Sixer.
Oh yeah.
That was a tangle. Edeva has a real neat style. He seems to need to work on his defense, however.
Well, yeah, and that was obviously a thing where if you're not experienced enough to deal with it, I mean, if you don't have a long time fighting against people and being prepared for this kind of thing in the gym, you're not going to handle somebody with Souza's level of aggression. because that was just an absolute slobber knocker from beginning to end, and both guys were landing and both guys were throwing, but Souza was ahead basically from the beginning. Even though Ediva was throwing back and doing well, Souza was ahead. And the one thing that really stood out to me about that fight is that I'm really glad Herb Dean didn't wait for somebody to fall down to stop it, because that was a perfectly justified stoppage without somebody needing to be hit to the point of being absolutely finished.
Yeah. I mean, Ediva took plenty of head trauma today. I don't think anybody could say they didn't get their money's worth entertainment from that fight, and went out on his shield, whether he got knocked out or knocked down or not. That was an excellent call by Herb Dean there. And then the other fights on the prelims, kind of bummed to see Paulo Thiago go out like that. But honestly, Paulo Thiago owes virtually his entire UFC career to a pretty lucky uppercut knockout of Josh Koscheck and finishing Mike Swick, who, as it turns out, was in pretty ill health when Thiago beat him. So kind of a mercy killing of Thiago's UFC career, honestly, by Ghassan Umalatov. But I'm not expecting great things from Umalatov. Are you?
No, I was swiftly corrected on Twitter with a lot of examples of much worse fights, but I did say immediately after that may have been one of the worst UFC bouts I've seen. It was definitely among the worst UFC fights I've ever seen. Boring, and neither guy looked like they were putting the other guy in danger at all. Neither guy had good defense or offense. They both looked like they did not belong in the UFC.
Yeah, which is not a good thing for a guy like Thiago, who's been in the UFC for several years now and fought at a fairly high level. But I don't know, nothing really else to say. I thought the Rashid Magomedov Rodrigo Dam fight was also dismal and endless.
I think that was Dom's fault, to be honest. Dom looked completely clueless. I mean,
he has been a very frustrating fighter for quite a while. I really don't want to see him in the UFC anymore.
He must have spent 12 minutes of a 15-minute bout literally just standing in front of Magomedov. Like he had no game plan. It didn't look like he had any sort of tactical approach to fight a kickboxer like Magomedov. He had nothing.
Dam looked like he stepped out of a time machine from like 2002, and he was representing the jiu-jitsu guy who's first encountered a kickboxer with a takedown defense and just had no idea what to do from there. But then, go ahead.
I could hear Brian Stan and John Anik struggling to come up with ways to compliment Dom for his, he can still crack, or he's very courageous. He looked like, I mean, there's a question, I think Dallas said this to me a long time ago, that he'll ask himself during a bout, sort of subconsciously ask one of the fighters, what are you doing right now to win this fight? And Dom had no answer to that question until the last 20 seconds of the final round. He had no plan. I don't know what he was doing in there.
No, I don't either. And that made for a pretty long preliminary card. So that was, that's 7 fights, and we've brushed over and talked about maybe 3 of them. Brings us to the main card. Featherweights, Robbie Peralta upset Honey Jason. I believe it's time. That was a pretty close fight. That was a split decision. I actually had it scored for Honey Jason, although I was not exactly sitting there jotting down points as the rounds went by. But that's 2 out of 3 losses for Honey Jason, and it seems like he's not going to become a contender or a star in the UFC at this point. And pretty big upset for Robbie Peralta. What were your thoughts on that one?
I thought Jason looked improved, and he also looked improved against Seiler. I think he's coming along in some ways. Honestly, I think that Robbie Peralta is not a good fighter, and I don't mean to. I'm being really negative now. I just had a really long day of underwhelming fights, so apologize for my incredibly negative outlook. But Peralta's not a solid fighter, and I think a lot of that comes down to coaching. He looked better this time than he did in his last fight, but what I remember in his last bout is that he had no idea how to escape to the bottom of side control. And in this fight, the biggest thing that stood out is that he had absolutely no setup for any of his punches and literally just ran forward, swinging punches right, left. There's no science or any thought to it. Basically, Peralta's the kind of guy who will not beat anybody but a very specific kind of fighter, which is other fighters whose styles are based on their own aggression, like Honey Jason. And it was obvious that when Jason couldn't force Peralta out of his game with his aggression, he didn't exactly look that impressive. Whereas when Jason can get somebody moving backwards like he did to Steven Seiler, he looks pretty darn good. But Peralta, I mean, I guess his gas tank was good for how much steam he was putting into every single shot. He lasted really well. That's the most impressive thing about that performance.
He was making lumbering charges forward behind wild swings all the way to the end of the fight. So
yeah,
he's doing his conditioning. It's funny that he was the American fighter because that is a very Brazilian style of fighting. But
that was like old school shoot a box.
Yes, that was, and it was ugly and not as fun as it used to be back in the day. Speaking of not as fun as they used to be, Demian Maia versus Alexander Yakovlev.
Good segue.
Yakovlev, completely unimpressive. Although, I mean, I guess it's impressive that he survived the mount from Maia, even escaped it once or reversed it. But I mean, Maia just took him to school. I guess it's good to see Maia get the win. But was Yakovlev a late substitute, or what was the deal with that? Yeah, I guess Mike Pierce was supposed to fight Demian Maia.
Which that would have been an interesting fight.
It would have been. I would have liked Pierce's chances in that one. I think Maia might be past his sell-by date just a little bit, but Yakovlev, he didn't seem to have. I don't know. I have to see him against. I think he might do fairly well against the bottom tier of UFC welterweights, but I don't see him doing big things in the division, and I don't see Demian Maia getting back into contender track, which is too bad for those of us who are big fans. And that brings us to the first Ultimate Fighter title fight. Farley Alves beat Marcial Alexandre Jr. Guillotine choke in the third round. I don't know. I was rooting for the karate guy, and so but Alves did look pretty good and completely demolishing Junior. So
Alves, I think that's a guy. If you folks who didn't watch this card are looking for fights to watch this fight, because Warley Alves is a guy to keep your eye on. He really impressed me. He was aggressive but controlled. He had a good gas tank. He looked incredibly strong. Some of that I think was the fact that. And a guy like Alexandre, whose nickname Lyoto is very unfitting because he's nowhere near as talented as Lyoto Machida. But I mean, he's still a decent enough striker, and Alves tooled him in every single phase of the fight. He had the perfect game plan to fight somebody with that style. He attacked his body, he attacked his legs, he took him to the ground, and he had such a tight squeeze in the guillotine, an arm-in guillotine, that Alexandre went out before he could tap. It was about
he went out fast.
A second and a half in the guillotine, and he was asleep.
Yeah, of course, that enormous, I believe it was a right hand that he got cracked with right before that. Couldn't have helped. Yeah, and I would say Lyoto is definitely a misnomer for him. He's much more of a karateka in the style of Stephen Wonderboy Thompson.
I mean, he's got the
stance.
He's got the Shotokan approach, which is, like Lyoto, though Lyoto's expanded beyond that in recent years. But, I mean, to compare him to somebody who is one of the best mixed martial artists in the world, I mean, it's kind of like calling somebody who likes to box with their hands down Anderson. You know what I mean?
It's true, but I don't feel like he has the same approach to range at all. I feel like he's much more like Wonderboy, where he's got the side-on stance, and he's trading blows, unlike Lyoto, who's constantly controlling the range, moving in and out of his opponent's range. I also didn't see any of the Lyoto trademark of attacking as soon as the opponent commits to a strike. I didn't see any of that stuff. But Alves, Chael Sonnen is the guy who's been saying, that Alves is going to be contending for the title pretty soon, and who knows? Kid's young and he looks very talented, and that fight is definitely worth watching, just for that enormous right hand that he cracked him with. Just one of the prettiest punches you're ever going to see, unless you're Alejandro's mom, because anybody who cares for that guy is going to feel bad looking at that. But then the heavyweight title fight just was everything that the middleweight title fight was not. I mean, it was just, I don't know, maybe I was tired and cranky, but it was not entertaining and not impressive. And Vitor Miranda, the Ultimate Fighter winner, too small for the heavyweight division. He's going to be moving down to light heavyweight, and I do not see him making an impact.
Carlos Jr. was the winner. Is that what you mean to say?
Yes. My bad. Let me update. Didn't have Wikipedia updated, so
You're
yes.
fine. You're fine. I thought it was a decent enough fight. I thought Carlos Jr. looked pretty impressive for someone having his fourth professional fight ever. I mean,
That's true. That's a very good point.
so I mean, if he's able to improve that much, to the point where he can beat somebody like Miranda, who, while not very talented, is a veteran of MMA, then that means he could be a potential future contender. And obviously, both of these guys are probably going to be light heavyweights in the future. I think they said Carlos Jr. came in at 209. I mean, that's like 5 minutes in the sauna away from light heavyweight. So
Yeah, he's not gonna have any problem making it. The thing I didn't see though, I didn't see any particularly lethal offensive tools in his
no,
arsenal,
no.
and
The only thing that was really impressive about Carlos Jr. He was going full of just like absolute full bore on every single attack, and not really any of them were landing because they were so telegraphed. But he was using Miranda's defensive reactions from those crazy attacks to set up takedowns, which was nice to see. At least some tactical approach from him.
It's true, and there were some pretty decent takedowns. I just don't see him pulling that off on anybody. I just see him getting the crap beat out of him on the feet before he can try to do that against anybody at the top level of the division. But hopefully they'll bring him along slow.
He's at about the Fabio Maldonado level of light
Yeah.
heavyweight.
And speaking of Fabio Maldonado, oh my God, 35 seconds of ass kicking. Felt bad for Fabio. Ballsy of him to step up to heavyweight to fight Miocic, one of the best boxers in the heavyweight division. And Maldonado, he's primarily a boxer, but he's a boxer with no head movement who is willing to trade blows to land a blow, but without knockout power of his own. So he really didn't have a prayer. Terrible stylistic matchup. And a pointless fight. I mean, Miocic. I don't know. I don't like Miocic's chances against Junior Dos Santos. Basically ever, unless Dos Santos is just demoralized from having been beaten by Cain Velasquez and is no longer the Junior Dos Santos that once terrorized the division. But I don't know. It was just a pointless fight. It was disappointing. They didn't have a lot of options once Dos Santos got injured pretty late in the game because the fight was in Brazil. They had a limited pool of fighters to draw on. So, at least they didn't pull Carlos Barreto out of retirement or anything to fight Miocic, but just kind of a pointless fight and very anticlimactic, which is kind of a tradition for the headliners of Ultimate Fighter finales. But I don't know. Any other thoughts on that fight? I mean, did that tell you anything about Miocic?
Not really. I mean, he's basically as good. He's as good as we knew he was before this fight. Basically, two things about this stand out to me. One, Maldonado is exactly the kind of guy that fight promotions are built on because he may not be very impressive, but he is the type of dude who will step in against a natural heavyweight on very short notice, and he must have known that he was an underdog. Two, and I initially wanted to say this about the Mousasi Munoz fight, but this one's a far more stark example. It's embarrassing to the UFC when they can't just admit in their promos that one fighter is a massive underdog. And I really wish they'd be more upfront about saying, this guy's probably going to get killed. Come see Stipe Miocic put on a clinic. Because it looks ridiculous when Maldonado goes in there and gets dropped at the first clean punch. Or the second
John
clean
Anik
punch.
was actually calling him an underdog, which was a little bit unusual.
Well, during the actual commentary, Stan and Anik finally started to talk about how Maldonado is stepping up and this is a really big risk for him. But
the hype reel was ridiculous.
Yeah, the pre-recorded promos were like Maldonado's 22-0 as a professional boxer against fighters with completely losing records or making their professional debuts. Like, they don't. It's meaningless. They just say the most meaningless shit to make it sound like it's competitive. Why not just say Fabio Maldonado is a light heavyweight who has virtually no chance, and he is showing incredible balls to step up and fight Stipe Miocic on such short notice. Come see if he can do it.
Yeah, I think it speaks to something deeply dysfunctional in the UFC's mindset that they can't just tell the truth about fights like that. Like, there's a way to sell that fight and tell the truth, and then there's a way to bullshit, try to sell that fight, and that's the road they chose to go down. And like you said, it was just ridiculous. Like, anybody who follows the game at all knows Fabio Maldonado had little to no chance in that fight. I mean, a guy moving up in the weight divisions, no power, bad defense against a guy who's a far more technical boxer than he is. You know, just I don't know. It's just a kind of a waste of Miocic's time, but it couldn't be avoided. The Dos Santos fight would have been a real test for Miocic. Even one where you're almost wondering what were they doing there, because all that does is eliminate a potential title contender in Miocic, because I think Dos Santos would be a pretty prohibitive favorite. But as it is, now he's got a 3-fight winning streak. I don't know. I don't know. It's hard for me to see him as a credible title contender, and the title's going to be tied up for a while with Cain Velasquez and Fabricio Verdum doing the Ultimate Fighter show before they fight in Mexico. But anyway, such as it is. Any final thoughts on the long day?
Don't do it. Don't watch this many fights in a row, because you won't like fighting anymore by the time you're done. I will say this: if I didn't know I was going to be recording this video after the event, I would have gone to sleep before the co-main event of the Brazil card, because I was tired and it was dragging. And I'm sorry if that makes this a bummer of a video for everybody watching for updates after the fight, but you know, oversaturation, it's a spirit killer.
It's a real thing, and that's we're just here, we're just fans, we're just telling it like we feel it and see it. So I'm in the same boat. I would have totally gone to bed hours ago had it not been you know, for the fact that we had to shoot this video. But we like shooting these videos, and it's fun to see the feedback. So let us know what you think. Give us a like on YouTube. Follow us on Twitter. I'm at KidNate, and Connor is at, is it the Boxing Bush or at Boxing
Just
Bush?
Boxing Bush.
At Boxing Bush, BUSCH. So, and I have learned to spell your last name now without having to check. So I'm pretty proud of myself for that. And read us on bloodyelbow.com. I'm not going to do a bathrobe review for this. And what's the next UFC? There's like a couple more crappy ones coming up after this. Let's see.
I don't really know.
There's UFC 174 with the flyweight title fight, but the next one is Fight Night Henderson versus Kabalov, Benson Henderson versus Rustam Kabalov, and that's going to be pretty interesting, actually. That's June 7th. That's coming up this Saturday from Albuquerque, New Mexico. So, and that's also got Diego Sanchez and Ross Pearson, John Dodson versus John Moraga. That looks like a pretty good card, actually. So.
It's a solid card, actually. That's a good one. I will say this. MMA and UFC fans, to avoid fight fatigue, because I'm sure some of you, the most hardcore among you, are experiencing it, mix it up and watch other combat sports, because the best part of my day was watching Froch versus Groves 2 in the late afternoon, and that was a hell of a fight. And just watching boxing and kickboxing every now and then can keep you from hating your job as a hardcore fan of MMA.
Indeed. I also highly recommend catching these fights later when you can fast forward through them on Fight Pass. If the card's on Fight Pass, take advantage of that and watch it later. Anyway, thanks very much, Connor, and adios, MMA aficionados. We'll see you next time. This is KidNate.